Welcome to The Explainer. I am so thrilled to have you here with us today. If you're the kind of focused learner who just wants to cut right through the noise and get straight to the facts, well, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're setting the stage for a completely data-driven teardown of a headline I know you've probably seen everywhere lately. You know, the supposed death of the US dollar. We're going to unpack the latest comprehensive June 2026 research to really separate the geopolitical fiction from the hard structural reality. So is the US dollar actually about to be dethroned? I mean, we've got to start by acknowledging the incredibly loud geopolitical hype around this whole question. You might remember the 2024 Kazan summit, right? They symbolically passed around this prototype BRICS banknote. And man, that moment just sent shockwaves through the media. People were predicting a brand new global financial order was going to arrive the very next day. But as we know, visual symbols aren't exactly the same as fully functioning monetary systems. So we're pivoting right now to an objective reality check to see what's actually happening beneath all that political rhetoric. Here's how we're going to break this mystery down today. First, the dollar demise myth. Second, dominance by the numbers. Third, the BRICS alternatives. Fourth, cracks in the BRICS. And finally, number 5, the realistic future. Let's get right into it. All right, part 1, the dollar demise myth. Think of our investigation today as kind of looking into these wild rumors about the US dollar's imminent collapse. To really get why those rumors are, well, mostly myths, we've got to understand this one absolutely crucial concept: network effects. In academic speak, this is basically the phenomenon where a currency becomes deeply entrenched simply because counterparties, international contracts, and clearing systems are already using it. But let's break that down into an everyday analogy because it makes a lot more sense that way. Imagine trying to convince the entire world to just stop speaking English in international business and simultaneously switch to a brand new, totally invented language overnight. It's virtually impossible, not because the new language is bad, but because all the books, the contracts, the communication systems, they're all already written in the old one. Constructing a global reserve currency requires massive, deeply entrenched infrastructure. It basically becomes a public good that just perpetuates its own use. Moving right along to part 2, dominance by the numbers. Okay, let's pivot from the theory to some cold, hard market data, because the sheer visceral power of this disparity is honestly mind-blowing. When we look at global foreign exchange reserves across 2024 and 2025, the US dollar commands a massive 58% share. The euro is sitting at 20%, and the Chinese Renminbi, which is the most internationally prominent BRICS currency by far, sits at a mere 2%. Now, sure, the dollar's share is definitely down from its historical peak of 72% back in 2001, but the sheer magnitude of its remaining dominance is absolutely decisive. Central banks around the world still overwhelmingly choose to hold their savings in dollars. And honestly, the brilliance of the dollar's grip is even crazier when you look at daily trade. The US dollar is literally on one side of a staggering 89.2% of all foreign exchange trades globally, almost 90%. The renminbi, just 8.5%. This contrast proves that when it comes to daily global commerce, the dollar isn't just popular, it remains practically indispensable. It is the absolute lifeblood of global trade. $30 trillion. Just let that massive number sink in for a second. This represents the size of the US Treasury market as of early 2026. We're talking about the world's deepest pool of liquid, safe haven assets. When the global economy gets jittery and needs a safe place to park wealth, somewhere it can be liquidated rapidly without crashing the whole market, it goes straight to US Treasuries. No BRICS member, and frankly no other bloc on Earth, can currently replicate a safe haven asset pool of this astronomical scale. No way. Which brings us to part 3, the BRICS alternatives. Now, let's shift the narrative a bit here. It's incredibly important to acknowledge the genuine structural grievances of the BRICS nations, especially following those unprecedented financial sanctions in 2022. A lot of nations suddenly woke up to the risk of relying entirely on a dollar-based system. But look at the pacing of this movement. The term BRIC was coined way back in 2001. In 2014, we got the New Development Bank and Russia's SPFS system. Things finally accelerated in 2022 after the Western sanctions hit, which led to that BRICS paid prototype we saw in 2024. But notice the huge gap between the timeline of the conversation and the reality of structural change. We're talking about literally decades of discussion, yet the global financial architecture has remained pretty much the same. Now, that's not to say there's been zero progress. Detailing these technological developments objectively, we can clearly see China's SIP system, which is processing cross-border interbank payments in yuan. We see Russia's SPFS, built as a domestic alternative to the global SWIFT network.
And we have BRICS Pay, which is definitely an ambitious concept to link various national systems together. But here is the critical missing piece in all of this tech: a unified mechanism for settling trade imbalances. Because, it's one thing to send a digital message saying, hey, I owe you money, but it's an entirely different, highly complex challenge to actually settle that debt globally without a neutral vehicle currency.
Actually, a perfect real-world example of this exact headache is what's called the rupee problem. So following the 2022 sanctions, Russia redirected massive amounts of its energy exports to India, bypassing the dollar entirely and settling the trades in Indian rupees. On paper, it sounded like this massive de-dollarization victory, but there was a massive catch. Russia accumulated billions of rupees, only to realize they couldn't easily convert them to other currencies. And Russian markets, well, they didn't exactly need billions of dollars worth of Indian goods, so the money was essentially just stuck. This specific anecdote perfectly proves the limits of bilateral systems. Without a multilateral clearinghouse, basically a way to balance trade seamlessly across lots of different countries, local currency trades just hit a structural wall.
All right, on to part 4, cracks in the BRICS.
To truly understand this coalition, we have to look at its internal paradoxes and the geopolitical realities that are acting as huge structural barriers to a unified currency. On one side, you have India, who, by the way, holds the BRICS presidency in 2026, explicitly and publicly opposing a common BRICS currency. Then, on the other side, you've got China. China doesn't actually want a shared currency that dilutes its own power. They prefer the gradual internationalization of the Renminbi on their own terms. So the really crucial point here is that the two largest economies in the entire BRICS coalition have fundamentally opposed monetary goals. Without their unified backing, a shared currency is structurally impossible.
There's this quote from Harvard's Joseph S. Nye Jr. that just hits the nail on the head and captures the overarching irony of this whole situation. For a currency to be a true global reserve, money has to flow freely across borders. But China maintains super strict capital controls to manage its economy and keep its political leverage. It's wild. They want a global currency, but they completely refuse to lift the strict capital controls required to actually pull it off. As Nye points out, you need deep, flexible capital markets and an undeniable rule of law to reassure global investors. And according to the research, those conditions are simply nowhere close. External pressures are playing a massive role here too. US geopolitical pressure has been a severe deterrent. Following explicit threats of 100% tariffs on any nation attempting to replace the dollar, well, the economic math shifted pretty quickly. The risk of losing access to the US consumer market was simply too high. And as a direct result of that, major players like Brazil and even Russia quietly abandoned the common currency agenda in late 2024, removing it from future summit declarations entirely.
Finally, part 5, the realistic future.
So, transitioning away from all the theoretical hype, what should you actually expect to see? Well, the future isn't some dramatic overnight collapse of the US dollar. Instead, what we're looking at is a slow, fragmented, multipolar payments landscape. You'll see gradual corridor-level diversification. You're definitely going to see an expansion of local currency energy trades between specific allied nations, but you will not see a unified dollar replacement. The structural barriers, the internal divisions, and those unmatched network effects of the US dollar we talked about earlier, they make a sudden displacement highly improbable in the near term. But I do want to leave you with one final provocative thought to chew on. Will the US's own use of financial sanctions eventually achieve what the BRICS nations currently cannot? It's known as the sanctions boomerang effect. See, every single time the dollar is weaponized for geopolitical goals, it proves to non-aligned nations that holding dollars carries a real political risk. So, while the US dollar is dominant today, for sure, its continued weaponization creates long-term structural vulnerabilities that could slowly erode its supreme status over the coming decades. It is an absolutely fascinating paradox to watch unfold. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer today. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.